Hi, I'm Chris McBrien, a Gen-Xer, and the pop culture from my generation is awesome.
And I'm Yancy Eaton, a millennial, and the pop culture from my generation is dope.
Episode 40, Moon Movie Review. Hey, Chris McBrien here, along with Yancy Eaton. As always, this is Pop Goes Your World. You'll be able to reach out to us on Twitter at Yancy Eaton or at CMcBrien. McBrien is I-E-N. Or head over to popgoesyourworld.com. All of our contact information is on there. Yancy, what are you doing tonight, my friend? What's going on as we speak?
Right now, I am sipping on some very, very cheap black velvet Canadian whiskey. It was the cheapest bottle at the liquor store.
It comes all the way from Canada down to Florida, and it's the cheapest. So that tells you something
a very
about its
exotic,
quality.
dark whiskey. Yeah, and so I'm sipping on that tonight and just enjoying the first day off that I've had in 8 days. It's been a really, really tumultuous 8 days at work, but it feels really nice. Like, some people try to say that escapism is like a bad thing. Like, you should be avoiding that, and you should be present and living in the moment. But I view this podcast as kind of like an escape. It's a little mini vacation that we built in. Once a week we do this, and I look forward to it every single week. So I'm just ready to kind of, just get into it with a group and have some
Exactly. Escapism is what we're all about on this show. Pop culture is all about escapism and getting away from the everyday. And so we obviously revel in that. But I got to tell you, as a Canadian and a proud Canadian at that, as you know, Yancy, I got to send you some good stuff, man. Black velvet is crap. Seriously, you could use it to clean like your shoes or something, but
yeah, it's not the best, but I would be lying if I said that it was the worst that I've ever had. I'm trying to cut back on my caloric intake just because I keep gradually gaining weight, and so my wife suggested that I drink a couple mixed drinks as opposed to just downing like a ton of beers and stuff. So,
but downing a ton of beers is so much fun.
Chris, you and I speak the same language. We do.
Oh man, it's like you're Canadian, by association, almost loving all that beer. I'll send you some good whiskey sometime. Even some CC or something like that. I'll get you some good stuff. It's
sure.
But anyway, so anything you want to touch base a little bit about what's going on in the news lately?
Sure. So Paramore, it's a band I'm not sure if you're intimately familiar with or not. You may have heard of them, but they released a new album for the first time in 4 years. It's a female-fronted, kind of like an indie pop punk band by Hayley Williams, one of the best vocalists of the last 10 or 15 years. They released a new album that I've been obsessed with. I ended up buying it, and that's been a real positive in the music industry for me. I was really excited about it. On a negative side, however, I'm sure anybody who lives in the digital age, they've seen this already. But Chris Cornell, the former lead singer of Audioslave and excuse me, I'm just like coughing. Chris Cornell actually passed away. And that kind of caught me off guard or whatever. I woke up and I got multiple texts from people saying like, hey, Chris Cornell's gone. And, like he had just performed the night before and it looks like it was an alleged suicide. And, I'm not going to speculate on what his cause of death was or whatever, but I just did want to kind of mention it. A couple episodes ago, maybe a little bit more than a couple, but a few episodes ago, we actually did our best rock vocalist of all time. He didn't make my top 5, but I did give him an honorable mention just because he has one of the most iconic, interesting voices of like the last 25 years, and he, along with Nirvana, kind of led that whole grunge rock push, that whole scene, and it was just really unfortunate to hear that, and to hear the circumstances of which he most likely died was of a suicide. It was just really disheartening. I'm not like a mental health expert.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, I'll just be honest in regard to this. Like, I never really, not that I don't like his music, I never really got into that stuff. Mm-hmm. So, I know don't really know him all that well. I know he was in Soundgarden and stuff, but I don't know. I'm stuck in the 70s and 80s. If it didn't happen in the 70s or 80s, I'm like, I don't know what it is. And, I never really got into the grunge scene, and that kind of thing. So, I don't know. I just never, again, I'm nothing negative. As far as anything that I've heard of him that he's done, from a vocal point of view, he's an unbelievable talent. Unbelievable. But I never really got into that scene, so I don't know. I can't really comment on that too much. But I know, I remember you texting me right away and saying, hey, man, this is what happened. I can't believe it. So bit of a
in either event, it's unfortunate. I hate to bring up something negative like that, but he was very iconic for the last 20 years. And like I said, the circumstances surrounding it is super unfortunate. And this sounds very, very cheesy, but I'm serious about this. My family has been personally touched by mental illness like this. I've had people that I've known and worked with and family members take their lives. So I would just encourage anybody, if you do have those types of thoughts, or somebody who like that you might think is dealing with some issues, don't hesitate to reach out to somebody if you do need help, or if you see somebody that you think might, it may be an awkward conversation at first, but only good can come from it. And I just want people to kind of look out for those people that are around you.
Oh, good for you. I encourage students. Usually about 3/4 of the way through the semester, I'll always mention that to the class. I'll say, you know what, look around. If there's any students or any friends, that you haven't maybe seen in a week or two, now is the crunch time. Like now's the time people can get, people can get their heads out of, in different places and worry about things. And there's a lot of stress in that environment. And I try to encourage students to do that as well and just look out for each other. It's a good thing. Anyway, you ready to get started? We've got another movie review this week. You want to hit it?
Yep, let's do it.
Let's go. If it includes getting crunch berries up here in Canada, let's do it.
I had like this amazing childhood, which I did.
And he went on to play Takashi in Revenge of the Nerds, which is one of my favorite movies like ever.
True story, Ben Savage is the most famous person I've ever met in real life.
Playing the sitar and all these flowers would drop on him.
I had Reading Rainbow t-shirts. I had Reading Rainbow notebooks.
Not crunch berries, because we don't get those in Canada.
My mom basically locked us out of the house.
I gotta stay home and grease the Weezer.
In 94, that Little Rascals movie that came out.
In the 94 version, Jesse, did they have to grease the Weezer?
Oh, my.
Okay, so this week it's back to you, Yancy. So after last week when we did the iconic 1980 movie Airplane, my favorite movie, one of my favorite comedies of all time. So this week it went back to you, and you said that you wanted to review the 2009 movie Moon. So, so do you want to kick us off with anything before I get into it?
Yeah, sure. I can go ahead and set us up with the film. This is probably the most esoteric film that you and I combined have suggested for this movie review. So, like you mentioned, it's a 2009 British science fiction drama. It was co-written and directed by Duncan Jones, who's also done Source Code and 2016's Warcraft movie, which was legitimately one of the worst movies I have seen in the last 15 years. It was really, really bad. But however, I still really enjoyed this movie a lot. It only had a budget of $5 million, which I don't know if you were able to tell that it was very low budget whenever you're watching it, but a $5 million budget, and it only grossed $9.8 million. So this is a very under the radar film. I was texting a couple of my friends before the show. None of them had heard of it. But obviously this is a movie that I really enjoy. It's been something I've gone back to it multiple times. When people ask me for sci-fi recommendations, this is always something that I kind of, in my top 2 or 3 that I give to them. I don't know. Should we go ahead and just give like a brief plot summary of it?
Sure,
just so
because a few people, I think, if you recall last week when I said it's your turn to name a movie, you said Moon, and you're like, have you seen it? I'm like, I've never even heard of it. So
right, which is a big deal for you.
Yeah, I mean, so I'm sure there's other people that have. I've received a lot of emails and tweets in the time since then from people that said, hey, I really like this movie. I can't wait to hear what you've got. Your take is, I love this movie. It's a great movie. So it should be an interesting review for us. But yeah, take it away.
Okay, so this movie is based in 2035, which is in the very near future, obviously, and it's based around a company. It's called Lunar Industries, and they're like the near future Google, as far as they have completely revolutionized the way that the Earth, it acquires energy sources. So no longer are we using fossil fuels or anything like that. We get all of our energy from the moon. We basically mine helium-3 from lunar soil, which is rich in the material there. So we basically have a moon base that's privately owned, and there is one guy that is the only person who is on this moon base. And I'm going to go ahead and preface this by saying I'm going to have a ton of spoilers. I'm basically telling you everything that happens with this movie. If you have not seen it, which is going to be a majority of you guys, I would encourage you to watch it first before you listen to the rest of this podcast, because unlike Chris, I'm not able to objectively describe a movie and be critical of it without telling you exactly what happens all the way through it.
That's okay.
So let me just preface that and say, pause this film, take a day off, go ahead and watch it, and then come back, because we are going to talk about everything that happens. But long story short, this guy is working on this moon base for what he thinks is a 3-year stint, just doing menial tasks, basically, random physical labor, loading up whatever they have mined and putting into a capsule and shipping it back to Earth. But what ends up happening is he basically finds out that he is a clone. He is one of many, many dozens and dozens of clones that, over years and decades possibly, have basically been replacing each other. So every 3 years, a clone basically breaks down and a new clone comes up from the bottom of the space station and takes over for him. So they're led to believe that they're, a real person who had an accident. They woke up and they're just finishing out their stint, aboard this company in the space station, and then they're going to go back home and they have a life and they have a wife and a child. But in reality, that's not what happens at all. Like I said, they've been up there for dozens and dozens of years, and who knows how long they've been up there. But all those people, all those memories that were implanted into their brain are gone. These people are dead, and it's a really weird play on cloning and time and human rights. And I'm rambling at this point, so let me just go ahead and jump into it. And what did you think of this movie? Was this something you enjoyed? Was this a little too out there for you, or what were your general takes from it?
Okay, so here's the thing. So we decided to watch this movie. We actually watched it last night, very, very fresh in my mind. So last night, my wife and I, I get the movie in. We're gonna watch this, and I don't know, about 10, 15 minutes in, my wife is like, "Well, why is there gravity inside this space station? This movie isn't very realistic." And then she's like, about maybe 5 minutes later, she's like, "You know what? This movie is boring, it's slow, and I'm going to bed." And so she left. And like I say, that was about 20 minutes into the movie. And I'm going to get a lot of flack for this, but I got to say, Yancy, I wish I'd joined her.
Oh, Chris, no.
Yeah,
no. I knew this was risky. I knew
what
it was risky.
the hell did you make me watch? And I think it was critically received quite well, but just being honest here, I really did not like this movie. I did not like it. I don't know. Here's the thing. At the risk of sounding too cruel, this is an hour and a half of my life that I will never get back.
Wow.
Wow. And I blame you for it, young man. So
okay. Well, let's tackle this one. Let's tackle this like in pieces. Okay.
Sure.
So was it that because I've heard this exact same critique with Gravity with Sandra Bullock, right? It was another film I really enjoyed.
Gravity, though. Yeah,
and a lot of people said, "I don't get it. I don't know what's going on. It's very boring." Was it that the plot was too slow to develop, or that you did understand what was going on, but it wasn't enough to keep you kind of invested in the film? What was it?
I guess it was a combination of both. It's like nothing happens in this movie, and I'm not invested in the characters. There's only one character in the film. I mean, so that's very risky in itself. I don't know. Overall, like, I found it to be very slow, boring, nothing happens. I'm like, okay, and then at the end, like, even when I look back on the story at the very end of the film, I kind of look back on the arc of the story, and I'm like, why? Like, what's the point? What was the point of this movie? I don't understand. Like, at least when I look at something like District 9, you made me watch District 9, 2 movies ago for you. And at least that one, there was a lot of, like, archetypes in it. There's a lot of parallels to, political things and things like with refugees and all this kind of stuff. And there was some satire in it, and there was this going on and that going on. It was working on a few different levels. Whereas this one was it just plodded along. It was what it was. And it was just like, I don't know. It was just, I didn't understand the point of it. To me, like, it was just one of those movies. Like, remember we mentioned before, and we've talked about this a couple times, how I said Gen X movies have an inherent rewatchability to them. Like, you'd watch them over and over and over again. And I said, right, millennial films don't. And you argued that millennial films do, because the whole point of watching millennial films over and over again is getting something different out of them every time. Whereas this movie, like, you could not pay me to watch this movie again. The only way that you could get me to watch this movie again is with a wheelbarrow, a roll of duct tape, and an ether rag.
Okay, so and that's a lot there, and you're totally entitled to your opinion. That's 100% fine.
I'm going to get
it
flack
doesn't
for
personally
it.
offend me. Like, it's fine. So
and it's never meant to.
I 100% appreciate your honesty. So let me tackle, like, the idea of what's the point of this film. Okay.
Yeah.
Whenever I watched this, it was apparent to me, that he was a clone. Okay. And about a quarter through the film, whenever the two, to let the audience know what's going on, he basically meets an exact copy of himself. Okay. And normally in this moon base, it's not supposed to happen like that, where, you have two that are alive concurrently. Basically, one dies and another one basically regenerates, and that's it. And then he's implanted with memories of, what he's supposed to be doing in his past life and everything. And he's only supposed to be there for 3 years. But at the end of the 3 years, it's kind of planned obsolescence, and he dies. So there's one actor who plays all of these different iterations of this character. Sam Rockwell is the main actor. You may remember him from like Matchstick Men. He was the crazy child rapist on The Green Mile. I don't know if you have seen that film, Chris, but he was awesome in that. Yep. And he's done a lot of other like really small roles and stuff, but phenomenal actor. I mean, I think you can appreciate his acting is actually pretty strong in this, but I think the main point in this, it's talking about, at face value, it's about clones, and it's addressing the issues, like the societal issues that we're going to have to deal with, because the technology exists now for us to clone animals, and within a few decades, if not already, we're going to be able to clone people. So it's challenging our notion that is a clone, if I clone somebody of myself, is that copy basically subservient to me as a whole? Is it a lesser entity? Is its life less valuable than mine? And you could say, well, that's just about clones, but you can also apply that same idea, that same mindset to other types of things, whether it be something like, the immigrant crisis that we're talking about, or abortion, or even something like animals. To give you like a really simple analogy, invasive species are a huge problem in Florida, right, where I'm from. Mm-hmm. Whether it be Burmese pythons or iguanas or lionfish. So through no fault of these animals of their own, they have basically become unwanted, and all of a sudden it is morally acceptable and actually morally reprehensible if you do not kill these creatures because they're in a habitat where they don't belong. So there's this parallel in this moon base where you have a clone, and it's like they're basically relegated as subhuman. These are actual human beings with thoughts and emotions and memories implanted into them, but they don't have the same agency as a regular human being does. And it kind of tackles that whole issue of like, what is an actual human? Is this morally justifiable, because it's for the greater good, because, they're developing clean energy and they're running this moon base and other people don't have to do it. You see what I'm saying? It's kind of, it's tackling that idea of what exactly makes us a human and what are our rights as a human being.
Okay, so I understand what you're saying, and I would argue that I don't think this film does that properly. If that's the case, that it's, this is more like about, like who's human, who's not, do we have feelings? I didn't get that from the film. I didn't feel that this film had any an emotional ground to it. You know what I mean? Like, and usually to take that, maybe it's a character that you really, really kind of buy into, really care about, or something like that. But I didn't get that from the movie. I found the movie, and maybe it's based on the sets that were used and the fact that it's on the moon. I found the movie to be very cold and distant. Yep. And very, very kind of almost what's the word I'm looking for? I don't even know. It's just very, very cold.
Yep. And kind of like detached. Would you say it was like a detached?
Yeah, I guess maybe a little detached or aloof in a way. But I don't know. It was just very, very clinical almost in a way, and so there was no emotional ground to the film. So I think if the point of the movie was to explore issues such as who's human, who's not, who has feelings, what makes us human, this movie failed miserably at that. That's just my personal feeling about it. Right. And I just want to point out, I think it's interesting because this is the second one now. I know you really like sci-fi movies, so I can understand that's why you would have, nominated this film for this week. But I think it's interesting that this is the second movie in a row that has the major theme of it involves sort of memories being implanted into people, sort of artificially, and kind of like, what's the deal with that? I mean, it's a recurring theme for you. Is it something that you find very interesting from a science fiction perspective, or like, maybe you didn't even notice, consciously that you were doing that, but that's two movies in a row now that have sort of involved that.
Right. It's that's one of my personal little pet projects is movies and film and books that deal with the mind and the perception of reality, and how you can basically morph anything, and everybody's expectation and perception of reality is completely different. And it's like this too, where here you have basically, I don't want to say they're sentient beings, but you have dozens and dozens of copies of the exact same human, right? They're basically in like this chronostasis, chamber where they aren't alive. They don't have a heartbeat. They don't have anything like that, and they're generated to become alive. And it's playing on the ideas of consciousness, and like I said before, what makes us a human. Just the whole state of reality. And that's something that it is one of my absolute favorites. Is like we talked about with like the Matrix, and with District 9. What exactly makes us human? That's kind of like how I like to take. I like more of like a psychological thing as opposed to creature features or something that jumps out to you, or you're just being startled, as opposed to actively thinking and being involved in the movie as to what does this mean, where is it going, and how does this affect life today. I think it's a perfect representation of how even now, in 2017, we're still struggling with what basic human rights we give to things like a person from a different country who has been displaced by war, or an unborn child in the womb, things like that. It's still very, very basic, but it's a debate that we've been having for 100 years. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I wonder it too. Like, so I wonder, maybe you can answer. You're the guy to answer this in terms of the millennial generation. Like, because it seems like this is the second movie in a row. Like I said, with The Matrix, I thought handled this idea a little bit better in terms of the fact that people are just basically being used. Being exploited in some way for some sort of gain. With The Matrix, it was obviously, these aliens that did it to get power, right? Like actual electrical power out of human beings. And in this one, it's about a corporation who basically creates these clones to work the mines, because after 3 years, as we saw with the one character, I guess I'm assuming he got sick, like radiation sickness or something. That's why he was sick, and was, blood and all that kind of stuff. So they're not going to allow, you couldn't put a human up there. They're going to die. So, you create clones to do it. And then when they get done their usefulness, we just kill them off and we bring up another clone. And then therefore they just keep working the mines and we get all the energy that way. So the themes are very similar that way. So is there like a general feeling amongst the millennial generation is there like a feeling of angst? In terms of this fear of being manipulated by an external force or power some way? Like, it's a recurring theme here in two movies.
I think you're just scratching at that like it's a very minor possibility, but I think you actually nailed it right on the head, where that's probably the main driving theme of this and The Matrix, where it's basically challenging the premise that everything that we're taught to believe is a complete lie, where you're thought to believe that the system that we're currently operating in is completely fair and valid and just, when in reality it's not. There's a system that's in place that benefits a very select few, and it's up to us to kind of acknowledge that it exists like that and to do something about it. So I think this is one of those gaining consciousness films where it's using an analogy and it's using a metaphor to basically to force its audience to think on a wider scale. So I mean, like I said, you threw that out there, I think almost as like just a very initial kind of start the conversation, but I think you actually nailed it exactly on the head. That's probably the main theme of this, is to get us to think a little bit wider, to think of not like this one specific case or that one specific scenario where a human is duplicated and how that affects his human rights and stuff, but to think even wider. How do each of us individually fit into a gigantic economic system? I'm really fascinated by stuff like this, and I think it's going to become apparent as you and I keep suggesting more and more films. I want to mix it up and have different type of genres and stuff like that. But right now, presently, I'm 28 years old, and this is the type of films that I'm constantly kind of evolving and just retreading and going over and over and over again, because like these movies where it's challenging your place in the world, me as like a late 20s, that's kind of what I'm dealing with personally, where I'm trying to find exactly how the world works, and I'm re-challenging all the notions that I was fed my entire life, and it causes me to rethink about how the world actually works. So I find myself like placing movies like this that only grossed $10 million worldwide. They have so much more importance to me right now. So my question to you is, let me turn that into a question. Like, did you have films like this whenever you were a teenager, or you were in your early 20s or late 20s, where when you watched it actually challenged like your idea of how society worked or your place in it? Can you think of anything like that? I know it's kind of a really weird question to ask, but any movies like that actually made you think differently about the way that the world works?
No, nothing that comes to mind right off the top of my head, that's for sure. And I think it goes back to what we said last week, where I think a lot, not to say that Gen X movies are dumbed down a bit, but I think Gen X movies are just kind of, they're brilliant in their simplicity. That there's just a very simple plot. There's a simple story arc, and that's what it is. And that's what makes it rewatchable, because it's very simple and it's like comfort food. You go back over and over again, you just watch it, and it's great. Whereas it seems like a lot of the millennial films, there's a lot more of a high concept and kind of that going on. I made the comment before too, that I believe the greatest sci-fi films base themselves in premises that are rooted in the time in which that they're created, and then the time that they come out. And I mentioned before, like if you go back to the 50s with something like Invasion of the Body Snatchers, was definitely rooted in the time. People were scared of, McCarthyism and communists and all that kind of stuff. And in the 70s, there was disaster films, and things like that. In the 80s, people were worried about the Cold War and things like that. Whereas with especially the early millennial stuff like The Matrix and like this, people are concerned about being taken over by, machines or, computers taking over their lives or not having full control of their lives, so on that, in that sense, I think it's kind of cool, but I cannot say directly just off the top of my head that there's any films from my generation that made me think on sort of an existential level, other than just enjoying it for what it was in terms of a story, not off the top of my head. Anyway,
that is pretty interesting. And one of the things I love about doing this podcast with you, though, is that you can tell that you and we're products of two completely different environments. And I think if you polled 100,000 people who were born within 2 or 3 years of you, I'm not saying all of them. I don't like to put people in a huge bucket, but a lot more of them, I think, would have your leanings as far as what their personal tastes are or what they gravitate towards as far as music, movies, and books, that type of thing. And whereas with me, I think you would find that more people born within a handful of years of me, they would align themselves more with films like this. So like 2009, Moon came out. It only did $10 million, but I can guarantee you that a vast majority of that $10 million was people relatively close to my age demographic. You know what I mean? Where this was something that was speaking to them individually, and movies from your generation, while I still enjoy them, and I can be honest and say that they have like some serious staying power, and it's something that I could go back and rewatch. They're speaking to two different audiences, so it may not it may not speak to you directly. It may not have that same entertainment value with you, but it does work for like a different swath of the population.
Well, you make a good point that it certainly didn't find an audience when it came out. I mean, it finished 161st at the box office in 2009. It was sandwiched right between the two classics, Broken Elements and Miss March. So, you can figure that, but that being said, so that's okay. That's not necessarily a criticism, because a lot of great films didn't find an audience when they first came out. They took time to build that. That being said, I don't think this is a great film, and I don't think it's going to build an audience over time either. That's just my thoughts. A couple of things, though, some notes that I did take when I was watching it that I thought was interesting was there are, we speak of, we always talk about Gen X versus the millennial generation. Obviously, that's what the podcast is all about. But there was quite a few things in this movie that were Gen X references. And I don't know if you picked up on all of them. Like that at the very beginning, when he was getting his hair cut and he had that thing on his head and it was cutting his hair, that's called a Flowbee, by the way. Just so you know. So you might have to go and like Google this, but the Flowbee was a thing that they used to sell in infomercials, in Gen X in like the 80s and 90s. And it was basically attached to your vacuum cleaner and it just sucked your hair up and cut it. So he was using that. Another thing I noticed was, when it was time to have some downtime, he would watch shows like Bewitched and Mary Tyler Moore. Like holy smokes, look at this Gen X. I thought there was a lot of similarities between the look and the themes in the movie, between this movie and 2001: A Space Odyssey. I
knew you were going to say that, specifically the AI, the counterpart, his assistant. He basically sounds just like Hal. His name's Gertie. He's narrated by Kevin Spacey, who was probably the single most expensive aspect of this entire film. If it were a $5 million budget, probably $2 million of that was for Kevin Spacey voicing Gertie in this. But he is like a more modern, millennial version of Hal. And that you kind of hits you right from the get-go. And two other quick things I'll mention in terms of a connection to Gen X was when he turned on the music, he was listening to Katrina and the Waves, Walking on Sunshine, and which is a huge 80s song. And then the other thing that I thought was interesting was when he walks by, he claps his hands and he uses the clapper to turn the lights off. Yes.
So that's a big time 80s thing too. So there was definitely a lot of that going on. But I still got to say, and again, I'm going to get emails, I'm going to get tweets about it. I don't care. It's just my opinion. It's an hour and a half of my life that I'll never get back. I really just didn't like that. I don't know. That was just my thing. Anyway, are you ready now to get into some trivia? I'm going to ask you some trivia about this movie and see how well you know it.
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, let's go.
Fun with Yancy.
Okay. So let's get to some trivia here. What do I got for you first? Okay, the director. You mentioned his name. Duncan Jones, right, was the director. Do you know who was his famous father?
I don't, Chris.
I got him. I was talking with Caveman today, our good buddy Derek Myers. I was talking to him, and he knew right away. I didn't even tell him the trivia question. He's like, oh, this director, and this is his dad. His dad was David Bowie.
Excuse me?
Yeah, David Bowie is his dad.
Really?
There you go. See, I'm teaching you stuff about this. Okay. So the star of this movie, obviously, Sam Rockwell, right? So although he'd been acting in TV and film, probably it's right since the late 80s, right? But really, Sam Rockwell's big break came in your favorite year, Yancy, in 1999, when he appeared in not one, but in 2 breakout roles. Yancy, can you name either one of the films from 1999 that featured Sam Rockwell and were 2 of his breakout roles?
I know one is The Green Mile, like I mentioned earlier.
Can you possibly guess the other one?
The other one was like a really weird sci-fi film.
Yes, you've mentioned it on this podcast before, actually. It came out in 1999. It was a satire.
It was kind of not Galaxy Quest, was it?
Yes.
Okay. I've only seen the film like one time. It doesn't have a ton of staying power, but yeah.
Okay, so Kevin Spacey, you mentioned him already. So one thing is, when they were going to get ready to make this movie, they sent him the script. He read the script, and he liked the script. But he wouldn't commit to doing the voiceover until the film was finished and he saw the final product. Okay, he wanted to see the final movie before he said, okay, I'll do the voiceover. And as it turned out, obviously, he agreed to do it. He did it in like a couple of hours. One afternoon, he nailed all of the voiceover work for it. But if he would have refused to do the voiceover, they had a backup plan in place. Any guesses as to who the director was going to use to do the voice of Gertie?
Can you give me a hint? Some sort of hint?
Kevin Spacey does a mean impersonation of this guy.
I've seen Kevin's. Well, that's not fair because Kevin Spacey does a ton.
He
does
a lot of good impersonation. Let's just say he would have brought more cowbell to the role.
Not Will Ferrell.
No, Christopher Walken. Christopher Walken.
Really?
Yeah, Christopher Walken. They were going to approach to get it. Okay, so one more question for you.
Good question, though. By the way, really good question.
Good. Yancy, what is the one surefire way to waste an hour and a half of your life that you will never get back?
Chris, you don't got to kick me when I'm down.
Let's have some fun with that one. Okay, I tell you what, I thought it was an interesting one. I guess it had to come. One of these movies back and forth where you're like, I just didn't like it.
They're not all going to be hits, Chris.
No,
they're not all going to be
cool. And that's cool. I was surprised that such a clunker, for me anyway, came so early in this, but it's all good. Okay, Yancy, here's what I want you to do. I want you to watch for next week and come back and be prepared to talk about this movie. It's a Gen X flagship film. Yes, I'm talking about the 1985 John Hughes Generation X classic, The Breakfast Club. Okay? I want to know how a millennial relates to that movie. I want to know if the themes and the issues hold up and if they resonate with you and your generation or not. So this is going to be an interesting. I want you to come back next week having watched The Breakfast Club, and we're going to talk. Are you up for that?
I'm up for that. I have never seen this film, but this is one of those films where everybody has, and every time I say I haven't seen it, it's almost like blasphemous. Like people can't believe
Twitter, I see that all the time. People are like, I can't believe you haven't seen that, Yancy. Oh my goodness. Yep.
Unlike me recommending movies that came out in 1999 or 2009 that had a $10 million gross, like this was actually a very big film that a lot of people hold, near and dear to the heart. So I'm ready for it. I need to watch it. So.
You do need to, and I really hope that you come in next week being able to say, I understand why that is. But I'm curious to know, because really, as I mentioned to you way back on episode 1, we were talking about the movie that defines our generation, and you said The Matrix best defines the millennial generation, and I said The Breakfast Club best defines Generation X, because I think it just really speaks to the sort of that angst, that teen angst, and kind of the things we all went through and all that. But I'm curious to know if it holds up today, because I think it does. I think it does. I think you watch it and go, yeah, I went through the same things. Yeah, I knew people like that in high school. I was one of those people. So I'm hoping that's going to be the case, but we're definitely going to find out. It's definitely going to make for some interesting talk. So next week, we're going to take a look at The Breakfast Club. Sound good?
Sounds great, man.
All right. Well, until then, this is Chris McBrien, of course, for Yancy Eaton, as always saying, thanks for listening to Pop Goes Your World, the pop culture podcast for the generations.
Thank you for listening to the Pop Goes Your World podcast. Continue the conversation on Twitter at @CMcBrien or at Yancy Eaton. Please consider leaving a review for the podcast on iTunes or wherever you download and listen to the show.